The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter when I walked in. Cream-colored, thick stock, the kind that costs more than a dinner out. My brother's name was handwritten on the front in my father's careful cursive. Not mine. His. I set down my bag and stared at it for a long moment. Then I poured myself a glass of water, leaned against the sink, and waited for someone to explain. Nobody did. My father was in the living room watching the news. My mother was humming something in the hallway. Normal Tuesday evening sounds. And that envelope sat there like a small, quiet bomb. My name is Lydia. I'm 32 years old. I'm a licensed CPA and a certified fraud examiner. And for the past 4 years, I've worked as a financial forensics consultant for a firm that contracts with the IRS and several state attorneys general. I've testified in federal court. I've traced shell companies through 6 different countries. I can read a balance sheet the way most people read a text message. My brother Gareth is 35. He sells gym memberships and has declared bankruptcy twice. But our family has always run on a different accounting system, one where effort doesn't count, only proximity, only loyalty, only being the one who stayed. Gareth stayed. I left for college at 17 on a full academic scholarship, worked my way through a master's degree, built a career in a city 4 hours away, and came home twice a year with wine and gifts and a smile that took practice. Every visit, my mother would sigh and say the house felt emptier since I left. Every visit, my father would mention something Gareth had done that week. Fixed the gutters. Mowed the lawn. Drove them to a doctor's appointment. The implication was never subtle. I had chosen ambition over family. Gareth had chosen family. What they never said out loud was that I had also chosen myself. I picked up the envelope. It wasn't sealed. Just tucked in at the flap, the way you tuck something when you don't care if the wrong person sees it. Inside was a deed of gift. A formal legal document transferring full ownership of the family's commercial property, a strip mall my grandfather had built in 1987 in a suburb outside of Columbus, to Gareth and his wife. The document was dated that morning. My parents had both signed. The property was worth roughly $1.4 million. Nobody had mentioned this to me. Not a phone call. Not a text. Not a single word over Sunday dinner 2 weeks ago when I'd driven up specifically because my mother said she wanted the family together. I read it twice. Then I folded it back along its original crease, tucked it into the envelope exactly as I found it, and placed it back on the counter. I walked into the living room and sat down in the armchair across from my father. He looked up. "You see the game last night?" "No," I said. "I don't really follow basketball." He nodded and looked back at the television. My mother came in and sat beside him on the sofa. She glanced at me and smiled. "You look tired, Lydia. Did you eat?" "I'm fine," I said. We sat in silence for 11 minutes. "I know because I counted." Then I said, "I saw the envelope. The room didn't go cold exactly. It went still. The way a conversation goes still when someone has been waiting for something and it finally arrives." My mother looked at her hands. My father muted the TV. He said, "Your grandfather built that property for the family. Gareth has been managing it. He's been collecting rent and depositing it," I said. "That's not management, Lydia." My mother's voice had that particular tone, the one that meant, "Don't make this harder." "He needs it," my father said. "He's got the kids, he's got the mortgage. Carla's not working right now. You have your career. You have your salary. You don't need it." There it was. The logic they'd been building for years, one small decision at a time, assembling it brick by brick until it looked like a wall. My success was the reason I didn't deserve anything. My stability was the justification for taking from me. The better I did, the less I was owed. I looked at my father for a long moment. "Okay," I said. He blinked. He'd expected a fight. "Okay," my mother repeated. "Okay," I said again. I stood up, picked up my bag from the hallway. "I'm going to head back tonight. Early meeting tomorrow." I hugged them both. I meant it, actually. Whatever was about to happen was in anger. Anger is what I felt at 19 when my mother gave my college laptop to Gareth because his had broken. Anger is what I felt at 24 when they didn't come to my graduate school graduation because Gareth's oldest was in a soccer tournament that weekend. What I felt now was something much quieter and much more useful. It was clarity. Before I tell you what I did next, I want to know where you're hearing this from. Drop a comment, tell me what time it is and what city you're in. I want to see how far this story travels, because what happened next still doesn't feel real, even to me. I drove back to Columbus that night with the radio off. Here's what nobody in my family knew. 3 years earlier, I had done a routine title search on my grandfather's commercial property as part of my own estate planning. My grandfather had passed in 2019, and the property had transferred to my parents through a basic will. Clean and simple. But during that search, I noticed something that had been sitting in the county records for decades, completely unaddressed. My grandfather had added a clause to the original deed in 1994. It was a right of first refusal clause, tied to any future transfer of the property, meaning that before ownership could be conveyed to anyone outside the direct bloodline, the clause required notification to and written consent from all living descendants. I had never been notified. I had never given consent. I'm a fraud examiner. I read documents for a living. I understood exactly what that clause meant. I also understood that my parents didn't know it existed. They'd never done a title search. They'd used the same attorney who drafted my grandmother's Christmas cards and hadn't had a complex real estate transaction since 1997. He'd missed it, or hadn't looked, or hadn't cared. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a cup of coffee that went cold, and a copy of the 1994 deed amendment I'd saved in my files. I read it again slowly. Then I called a real estate attorney I knew through work. She picked up on the third ring, which tells you something about the kind of people who work in financial law. I said, I have a situation. She said, tell me. I talked for 40 minutes. She asked 8 questions, all of them precise. At the end, she said, the clause is enforceable. Your parents' transfer is defective. Gareth doesn't actually own that property yet. What happens next? I asked. She said, that depends on what you want to happen. I thought about the envelope on the counter. The tucked-in flap. My name not on it. I want it done correctly, I said. Here's the thing about my brother that I've spent years trying to explain to people who didn't grow up the way I did. Gareth isn't evil. He's not even particularly cunning. He's just someone who learned very early that the family system rewarded presence over performance, and he optimized accordingly. He stayed close, made himself necessary in small, visible ways, and never once questioned whether the arrangement was fair because it worked for him. He's not a villain. He's just comfortable. And comfortable people rarely examine the foundations of their comfort. His wife Carla is a different story. Carla understood the arrangement and actively cultivated it. She kept the relationship between Gareth and my parents warm and well-fed. She remembered birthdays, organized holidays, made sure my parents saw their grandchildren regularly. She positioned herself as the daughter my parents had always wanted, and she positioned me as the absence in the room. Every compliment she gave me in front of my parents had a small, invisible edge. Lydia's so driven. Lydia's always so busy. You must be so proud, even though she's far away. I never confronted her directly. That's not how I work. I collect, I document, I wait for the right moment. The right moment was now. My attorney filed a formal notice of defective title transfer with the county recorder's office. It triggered an automatic hold on the conveyance. Gareth's deed was frozen. He couldn't record it, couldn't leverage it, couldn't use it as collateral for anything. The property was in legal limbo. My attorney also sent a certified letter to my parents' attorney explaining the 1994 clause, the missing consent, and the required legal steps to cure the defect. I did not call my parents. I did not warn Gareth. I sat at my desk, opened my case files, and went back to work. The call came 4 days later. It was my mother, and her voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it before. Somewhere between frightened and furious, neither one winning. The bank called Gareth, she said. He was trying to refinance and they said there's a hold on the property. What did you do? I didn't do anything, I said. Grandpa did it in 1994. I just found it, Lydia. There was that tone again. Mom, I said very calmly, you transferred a property without notifying me. The deed has a clause that required my consent. That's not my fault. That's a legal reality. You're punishing us. I'm enforcing a document your father-in-law wrote before I was old enough to read. This is about money. You've always been about money. I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. I'm a fraud examiner, I said. I'm about accuracy. There's a difference. She hung up. My father called an hour later. His approach was different. Quiet, measured. He's always been the one who understands that raising his voice doesn't work on me, and he hates that he knows that. Tell me what you want, he said. Nothing specific, I said. The clause requires my written consent for any transfer. I'm entitled to review the terms and respond within a reasonable time, that's all. And how long is a reasonable time? The law doesn't specify, I said. Silence. Lydia, your brother needs this. He's counting on it. He should have been told not to count on something that wasn't legally transferred yet. Another silence. Longer. I didn't know about the clause, he said. I know you didn't, I said. And I'm not angry about that. But not knowing doesn't make the transfer valid. I could hear him breathing. When my father is working something out, you can hear it in the pauses. What would it take, he said finally, for you to sign the consent? This was the moment. This was the one I'd been quietly preparing for since I saw that envelope on the counter. Not the legal maneuver. That was just mechanics. This was the actual conversation. The one that had been 32 years in the making. I'd like to sit down, I said. All four of us. You, Mom, me, and Gareth. No Carla. No attorney. Just family. And I'd like to say some things that have needed to be said for a long time. And I'd like to be heard. My father was quiet for so long that I thought he'd put the phone down. Then he said, okay. We met at my parents' house on the Saturday morning in March. My mother had put out coffee and a plate of those butter cookies she makes for every difficult occasion, as if the right snack can cushion a hard conversation. Gareth was already there when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table in a posture that was trying to be casual and failing. He'd gained some weight since the last time I'd seen him. He looked tired and a little defensive, the way people look when they know they're about to be held accountable for something they'd convinced themselves wasn't their fault. I sat down. I did not take a cookie. For the next 2 hours, I talked. Not screamed, not cried. Talked. I told them about the laptop. I told them about the graduation. I told them about every birthday where their gift to me was an afterthought and their gift to Gareth was specific, considered, expensive. I told them about the time I needed $3,000 for a certification exam, and my father said he didn't have it, and 4 months later bought Gareth a used truck. I told them I had documented all of it. Not as a list of grievances, but as a pattern. The way you document a pattern of financial behavior when you're building a case. I told them what it felt like to build a life from scratch, to work 4 jobs across 7 years to pay for an education they should have helped with, to achieve things they could only partially acknowledge, because acknowledging them fully would require admitting how little they'd invested in me. I told them that I didn't hate them. I meant that. I also told them that love without fairness is just preference, and I had spent my entire adult life being the one they preferred less, and I was done pretending that was acceptable. Gareth looked at the table. He didn't argue. I think somewhere inside him he'd known for a long time that the math didn't add up in his favor morally, even if it had in every practical sense. My mother cried. My father didn't. When I finished, there was a silence that was different from all the other silences in that house. It wasn't the silence of discomfort or evasion. It was the silence of people sitting with something real. I didn't think of it that way, my father said finally. I know, I said. We thought we were helping him. You were, and you were doing it with things that should have been split between both of us. My mother wiped her eyes. What do we do now? That's up to you, I said. I'll sign the consent. The property can go to Gareth. I'm not going to hold it hostage. They all looked at me, surprised. But I want 2 things in return. First, I want a formal acknowledgement, just between us, doesn't have to be legal, that this transfer represents my portion of any future inheritance. If there's anything left when you're both gone, it goes to Gareth. I don't want it. I want us to be square. I want the ledger closed. And second, my father asked, I want a real conversation, ongoing, not the version where I come home and pretend everything was fine, the actual version. Gareth finally looked up. His eyes were red. I didn't know you felt this way, he said. His voice was tight. I mean, I knew something was off, but I didn't know it was this much. You didn't ask, I said. He didn't have an answer for that. Here's what I've learned, working in financial forensics. Fraud almost never looks like what people imagine. It isn't usually a mastermind in a scheme. More often, it's just a series of small decisions made by people who convinced themselves each individual step was reasonable. No single choice seems catastrophic. It's only when you pull back and look at the whole ledger that you see what's actually been taken. Families work the same way. My parents never sat down and decided to deprioritize me. They made one small decision, then another, each one defensible in isolation. She's smarter. She doesn't need help. She has a scholarship. She has a job. She has a salary. She'll understand. And each small decision laid the groundwork for the next one, until 30 years had passed and there was a $1.4 million envelope on the counter with only one child's name on it. I signed the consent the following week. The property transferred to Gareth. I didn't ask for anything in writing beyond a simple letter my father drafted, acknowledging what we'd discussed, signed by all four of us. My attorney kept a copy. The refinancing went through. Gareth got his loan. The strip mall in Columbus is his now, free and clear. What I got was different and harder to appraise. Carla called me 3 weeks later. She'd clearly been briefed, and she was doing the thing she always does where she frames manipulation as warmth. She said she was glad we'd all cleared the air. She said she hoped we could move forward as a family. She said that she'd always considered me a sister. I let her finish. Then I said, I appreciate that. Going forward, I'd like us to be honest with each other when we talk. I think that'll serve everyone better. She said, of course. We both knew what that meant. My mother calls me every Sunday now. It took 3 months of awkward 20-minute calls before something in her started to shift. She asks different questions than she used to. Not just, are you eating and how's work? She asks what I'm reading. She asked once what I actually enjoy, what I do when I'm not working. She seemed genuinely surprised by the answer. I think she'd had a version of me in her head that had been constructed from absence, and she was slowly replacing it with something more accurate. My father sent me a card for my birthday this year. Inside, he'd written, in his careful cursive, that he was proud of me. Not of my job, of me. It was 4 sentences. I read them probably 15 times. I keep the card in my desk drawer. Gareth and I text sometimes. Nothing profound. He sent me a photo last month of something that went wrong with the strip mall's HVAC system with the caption, "Any chance you know how to depreciate a catastrophic failure?" I sent him back the relevant IRS publication with 0 additional comment. He replied with a single laughing emoji, and I sat in my office and felt something I hadn't felt about my brother in years. Something like ease. Here's what I want you to take from this, if you take anything. I could have let the property transfer go through. I could have driven home, seen the envelope, gone back to my apartment, and absorbed it like I had absorbed everything else. Added it to the ledger I'd been keeping in my head and never spoken aloud. I know how to do that. I've been doing it for over a decade. But I also know this, silence isn't peace. It's just deferred cost. At some point the account comes due, and the interest is brutal. I didn't blow up my family. I didn't rage, didn't threaten, didn't leak anything to anyone outside that kitchen table. I used the tools I had, the legal knowledge, the documented clause, the formal processes I understand better than most people in my parents' zip code. And I used them precisely. Not to punish anyone. To create a moment that couldn't be smoothed over with cookies and careful conversation. A moment where someone had to actually stop and listen. They did. That's not a small thing. In my experience, it's actually quite rare. I still live 4 hours away. I still come home twice a year. But the house feels different now. Or maybe I just move through it differently. Less like a guest who's learned to make herself invisible. More like someone who belongs there, even if her name wasn't always on the envelope. The legal hold on the deed took 11 days to clear from when I filed it to when I signed the consent. 11 days for 32 years of quiet imbalance to finally have a name. I didn't celebrate. I went to work. I opened my case files and looked at the next problem in front of me, because that's what I do. But I'm not going to pretend the drive home that Saturday night didn't feel different. The radio was on this time. I had the window cracked. It was cold enough that it stung a little. I didn't turn it up.